Hello all and welcome to my podcast. The goal of this podcast is to use Fu-style poetry as a lens for critiques of the Jia family's lifestyle and the role Jia Zheng and Bao Yu play in that regard. First, we must develop an understanding of the purpose underlying the composition of these poems. Then, we will apply this understanding to the scene in Chapter 6 where Jia Zheng and his literary gentleman and Bao Yu walk through the garden and begin to name specific locations, specifically Sweetright Village. Fu-style poetry's most distinguishing characteristic is the exhaustive detail with which it describes a setting from as many different angles as possible. Over time, scholars and critics have developed a second lens through which these poems may be viewed: reprimand for excessive consumption. It is often difficult to determine where the boundary between an author's use of prolix description and reprimand is drawn. In some cases, such as Sima Xiangru's Shenglin Park, it is obvious. This poem begins as two scholars use Fu-style poetry to describe the superiority of their respective emperors' hunts. But a third scholar goes further to describe the greatness of his emperor by detailing how he woke one night during a celebration of a particularly fruitful hunt to realize the flaws of his excessiveness. He elected to become a truly great emperor by living an exemplary life and offering his garden to the public. This poem is vastly different from what we see from the Jia family. The initial tour of the garden is littered with rich descriptions and even some short poems from author Cao Zhuixin to describe the fantastic scenes. One of the first scenes in the tour layers the two on top of each other, describing an artificial ravine ablaze with the vari-colored flowers and foliage of many varieties of tree and shrub which grew there in great profusion, and describing a bridge in a great green ravine a jade stream sped. A pair of stone plunged to the brink. Where the water widened to a placid pool, a marble baluster ran round about. A marble bridge crossed it with a triple span, and a marble lion's maw crowned each of the arches. The descriptive nature introducing this scene is reminiscent of the Fu style of poetry in both composition and nature. The extensive cataloging of these subjects is a characteristic of Fu poetry and Cao's description of the garden. The scene I am focusing on, the naming of Sweetright Village, is full of description and uses the many-angled approach of Fu via the long argument over the naming of the scene. In this, I believe Cao truly applies his literary knowledge and creative genius. Jia Zheng is overwhelmingly pleased with the desire to get back to the land, to a life of rural simplicity, evoked by the village and surrounding farmland. The literary gentleman echoed this sentiment regarding the architect's use of a stone rather than a board to inscribe the name of the location. If they had put up a board over the gate, the rustic atmosphere would have been completely destroyed, whereas this stone actually enhances it. Jia Zheng is so taken with this sentiment that he asks Cousin Jen to have an ensign made. Nothing fancy, just an ordinary ensign like one you see in the Nothing fancy, just an ordinary ensign like the ones you see in the country villages outside. Cousin Jen counters with a suggestion to use ordinary birds like hens, ducks, geese, and so on, to be in keeping with the surrounding. Cao Zhuixin here has used the many-angled approach of Fu poetry as a criticism of the Jia's lacking in self-awareness. The men all truly believe that this is the bucolic life enjoyed by those in the country villages outside, as Jia Zheng put it. They romanticize the country life and can only view it as they have learned in their readings of poems and stories by scholars. They do not see the struggles and inequities of this life. For the family, this is later proven in their complete depletion of money and inability to economize efficiently enough to survive. This is a stark contrast to Shenglin Park, in which the emperor is able to renounce his lifestyle and thrive post facto. The emperor learns to understand the people outside his sphere, sees their struggle, and does his best to help all overcome it. As the scene continues, Bao Yu chimes in for the first time since their arrival, offering a fifth addition to the naturalness of the village, except this one complains about the falsification of what is natural. Bao Yu questions what the ancients meant by natural, as this example of human artifice is anything but. As we found out, Bao Yu is at least partially propelled by Buddhist ideologies. In Buddhism, natural is often synonymous with spontaneous, and applied to the garden which is constructed to look natural is anything but. Consequently, Bao Yu disagrees wholeheartedly with appreciating this village for its naturalness. What Bao Yu lacks, and what keeps him in reality for the majority of this novel, is finding the balance between humanity and spontaneity. He is spontaneous, but does not understand the human part, which his father embodies. As a result, there is an inherent, irreconcilable division between Bao Yu and his father. This scene embodies that division, and Cao uses it to further his critique of the Jia family's respective bubbles they inhabit. In this scene, Bao Yu is noted by the literary gentleman to behave rather mulishly, completely disregarding the way his father may feel about his outbursts, as he only wants to push his intelligence and ideas on others. His father calls him out for this many times during the naming, claiming people his age can make a little knowledge go a long way. At the same time, Bao Yu's suggestions and ideas enrage his father, as they simply do not understand each other. The diversity of ideas, rather than being celebrated, is punished. Neither makes an attempt to understand each other or others, and their family suffers. So, when reading, or more likely rereading, this novel, consider how excessive descriptions of a certain object, and the often many different viewpoints that accompany it, can lead to a sort of breaking the code, to unleash the flaws within the object. Consider how a sole, contrasting voice can reveal the social situation at hand, and the potential consequences of not reconciling the differences. Thank you for listening to my podcast. I hope you have enjoyed and learned.